Since we are in Mumbai, मी मराठीत बोलणार होतो. But I don't think Mr. Ganguly understands Marathi, so I'll stick to English. Given that they asked me to follow him, I had to think of one thing I could do that he cannot. And I think it's speaking Marathi, hopefully.
Marathi, okay.
I had to feel good about myself. But transformational leadership, one of the things which, I've been really lucky to be a part of, honestly, is this whole Dell go private thing. I mean, the notion of a risk that was taken by our chief executive officer. And the reason he did it was simple. When you look at IT landscape, and a lot of you folks that I talk to, when you look at IT landscape of today and yesterday, and you look at the transformative technologies that are going to be required to cut down your application time to market, to cut down costs, to increase performance, they are honestly drastically different. Compare traditional architectures like an Oracle database deployment to new architectures like a vSAN deployment or Hadoop. They are so different. And Michael recognized that. He recognized the fact that the investments we as a company are going to have to make would be so drastically different to how we've operated in the past. And the stock market and the shareholders would be so penalizing of all of these investments. The only way to get it right would be to get out of the eyes of the stock market, make that transformative change, and be able to deliver what customers truly want us to deliver, to be able to take us in this next generation of IT. And that is the big reason why Dell went from a large public company to today the largest private company in the whole globe. And the risk has paid off to a great degree. The risk has paid off because we could sit back. We could try to better understand what challenges do customers face and how can we better serve those customers going forward. Because of the difference in the old world versus the new world, and don't get me wrong, it's not that the old world was bad. It's trying to figure out how do you coexist with these traditional IT architectures and these new IT architectures. And to a great degree for the last year and a half, that's where Dell has been predominantly focused on. And it seems to be resonating with the market. It seems to be resonating with our customers. In the storage space, a lot of customers are shocked by this. If I ask them who is the #1 terabyte seller of storage in the whole globe, it's Dell today. We could do that because of the things we could do with flash and pieces like that. In the server space, bear in mind, Compaq introduced the first x86 server in 1988. Dell honestly did not get into servers for 8 more years. So when HP acquired Compaq, they had an 8-year start on that. Yet, last quarter, the difference between Dell and HP from a market share standpoint is the lowest it has ever been in the history of Dell. And this is a result largely due to a lot of the investments we made, thinking about where do we want to take this company. And the honest truth is there was no way to do these changes in a methodical manner with stock market constantly looking closely at EPS and all of those pieces. Today we have that flexibility. I'll give you a joke. We were in with Michael Dell 2.5 weeks ago, we were doing a quarterly business review, and the topic of cloud was going on. And me and a colleague of mine were presenting a cloud business case. Big business case, $60 million of investments across marketing, sales, R&D, all of these places. And we presented, which had that price tag of $60 million. Michael says, "Give me a minute." He turned his chair around. He thought for a minute. He turned his chair back, looked at us. He said, "I talked to the board. The board says yes." That's how quickly we are getting into decision making. That's one of the advantages we had when we went private. And it's paying off in a big, big way. When we look at ourselves and look at the whole industry as it stands, we believe there are 4 different classes of vendors in the industry today. On the bottom left-hand side, you've got these legacy system providers. And don't get me wrong, a lot of folks in this room probably have legacy architectures. Don't get me wrong. Legacy systems work. There's no question about it. But let me give you one example. Flash. Simple. Flash on storage. Last year, flash on storage in the industry was $25 US a gig. Today, look at flash pricing. It's down to $5 US a gig. I can pretty much guarantee you by the end of this year, it will be below $2 a gig. In 1.5 years, we've taken flash pricing from $25 a gig to below $2 a gig. Now let me ask you one question. What if you were invested in legacy, which is a 3 to 5 year investment at the least? Could you take advantage of all of that innovation that is occurring? The answer is no. When it comes to legacies, the bet you're making is there's only going to be one vendor that's going to innovate in the market. And that was the case in 1970s when IBM used to rule. There's no question. Everybody could look at IBM and say IBM is going to make all the innovation. But in today's day and age, is IBM at the cutting edge of innovation? No. Look at Nutanix. You're talking about a $150 to $200 million company with a valuation of $3.5 billion. Look at Nexenta. Look at all of these small startups. That's where innovation lies. And being tied to legacy platforms cuts you off all of that innovation. And that is the greatest risk you run when you look at legacy platforms. You have a lot of these new proprietary solutions also. Cisco UCS is a great example. It's based on x86 architecture, which is fantastic. However, it is still a proprietary stack. Cisco UCS doesn't work with Cisco elements itself. You can't use Catalyst, which probably you've been using for years. You have to migrate to Nexus. You can't use the same racks. You can't use the same cables. Everything has to be migrated. And let's take that flash storage example on Cisco. When you go with UCS, you have 2 options. vSpecs, FlexPod. EMC, NetApp. Let me ask you, how much innovation has EMC and NetApp made on flash in the last 1 year? None. None whatsoever. Which is why our point is, we're not saying proprietary or legacy systems don't work. They do work. But the biggest challenge you run into with legacy system is the fact that it does not allow you to take advantage of all the innovation that is occurring in the market. And believe you me, innovation is occurring at a tremendous pace. When you look at the big analytics, big data and analytics, when you look at cloud, when you look at mobility, when you look at security, innovation is happening at a rate that it's never been done before. And the key is to have access to that innovation and work with partners who are going to allow you that access. On the bottom right-hand side, You've got what we call commodity systems manufacturers. Again, great systems, don't get me wrong. Acquisition cost is cheap, but then who's going to run those systems for you? Who's going to do systems management? Who's going to do the deployment? Who's going to do the maintenance? Who's going to do the patch upgrades? That's all left on the customer. And some customers might have that IT capability. However, most customers don't. So again, they work very cheap from an acquisition standpoint. However, they put a lot of burden on the customers. And therefore, your variable cost goes up. Your operating cost goes up in a big, big way. And that's where we honestly believe Dell is different. We are flexible. We are willing to work on your terms. You have a Cisco Catalyst environment, we will plug into that. We don't have a problem with that. We don't have a legacy profit pool that disallows us to do that. You want to look at software defined? We'll give you access to Nexenta, Nutanix, Cumulus, Big Switch, whether it's on storage, whether it's on networking. That's where we are fundamentally different to most of the players in the industry today. Now coming down to where we are, India. I don't know how many of you know this, but 80% of Dell's revenue actually comes from the top 10 markets of the world. India is a key part of that market. And your support has been absolutely critical. So thank you, because your support has been hugely critical for all the success we have seen in India in the past few years. We've seen tremendous success on the client side, on the server side. The next part of our journey now is going to be around solutions. How do we make solution deployment easier for you? Could we potentially pre-test, pre-build, pre-configure so that you don't have to spend your valuable time on doing that stuff around applications that are meaningful for you? That's where we're headed on the next step. And like I said, thanks to your support, we have been extremely successful. When you look at the picture on the left-hand side there, CIO Choice Award, we won in 7 different categories. The closest IT vendor to us was HP, and they won in 2 categories. We got 7 awards in different categories, and pretty much across the board, a lot of it in the data center, server, storage, networking, converged, and pieces like that. But that is all thanks to you folks, because I believe there were folks in this room who actually voted in the CIO Choice Award. Globally, we're making a lot of traction with analysts. 86% of analysts now recommend Dell. The truth is, 5 years ago, do you know what that number would have been if we asked analysts about our enterprise strategy? Would have been in the 40s, would have been in the 50s. But that concentrated effort to build IP in places that Dell was just not familiar in, and then the whole privatization piece coming together, is what drove a lot of the success we see today. In summary, you know, the topic of today's conversation is the notion of transformational leadership. One of the biggest examples I live by is basically what Michael did. Michael understood the landscape, understood where it was headed, and made a bold choice of wanting to make investments which would not be agreeable to the stock market, and therefore bought back and took the company private. I think that's one of the biggest challenges all of you face going forward. You all are going to live in a world where you're going to see very traditional architectures clash in a big way with newer technologies. You're going to be put under incredible stress from the new kids coming into your environment, the mobility, work from home, and all of those requirements. And you're going to have to be that transformational leader. Because at the end of the day, there's no doubt about the fact that IT can be a tremendous enabler to the business. We just have to start acting like IT will be an enabler and not focus only on lights on. Thank you very much.